Cool. Shall we get into the topic for today?
Yeah, boy, we've got tons to talk about here. You've got a great agenda for us, and we've got time too, which is nice.
Yeah, let's see if we can make good use of it. Right, so the proposal for this week was to talk about AGI timelines. Uh, I guess maybe we can start by briefly, well, even we may disagree if AGI is the right term. Uh, so let's maybe talk about what we mean because there's a variety of terms. Uh, because partly for social reasons, people are afraid of looking silly, so they try and find a term that doesn't sound like Kurzweil might say it.
Right.
So there's, transformative AI is kind of like a socially acceptable version of AGI for those who think AGI is for distasteful nerd types. But there's many terms that are kind of and just AI itself used to mean AGI, I guess. Now it's not clear. AI seems to denote a community and a research program more than a goal at this point. So, Adam, what do you mean? Or is AGI a term you would use, or what do you think is the definitive marker that we're looking into the future to see, and how would you
Yeah,
name it?
I still, and I have for many years thought in terms of three general categories for artificial intelligence, and everything that I've talked about or written about in the last decade or even more. My thinking really hasn't changed on this, and that is that you have what once upon a time was called narrow artificial intelligence. So this is just uh, uh, software of any kind, at least in my mind. Um, anything that performs tasks that are akin to intelligence or intelligence adjacent functions. So any kind of thinking, any kind of abstract manipulation, any quantitative reasoning, any logical reasoning, any inferential reasoning, anything of that sort at all that is done by any kind of machine, anything that's narrow artificial intelligence in my mind. So that's the first big category. We've had that forever, and we have extremely powerful examples of that now. But in my mind, that sort of basically just what for a long time was just software uh, it's become incredibly powerful, more powerful than I would have believed were possible and just to not yet be general, but still, nevertheless, not general and not certainly not sentient. And those are the other two categories in my mind. So there's narrow, and then there's general artificial intelligence that's not sentient. And I've thought that something like that is possible for a time, but perhaps not truly like in the limit, not truly general, not completely general, but functionally or pragmatically general. And by that I mean um, uh, a a some sort of that there is a capacity of of a system, an artificial system, to respond to novelty in an effective way. And that's how I've tended to think about this second category, general artificial intelligence that is non-sentient. That you could have very sophisticated, very clever algorithmic approaches that could, through their sophistication and cleverness, of the sophistication and cleverness of their design, and perhaps just brute force, also their raw computational power and resources, and memory resources, for example, that they could handle novel challenges, and that the result would be systems that can handle a very wide array of different tasks and solve a wide array of different problems and meet a wide array of different challenges. Perhaps not every single conceivable one that an agent could encounter or a system could encounter, but many, lots and lots and lots. And so this would be a step away from sort of the software that can win a game of chess but can't do anything else, to software that can a game of chess and Go and every other game you can imagine and drive a car and. And we seem to be getting, to my mind, sort of, that seems imminent to me. And maybe I'm wrong, but that is what feels like it's, holy moly, we are right on the cusp of something like that. Then the third category, in my mind, has always been artificial systems that are sentient. In other words, they have this additional function, this additional capacity. And I don't know whether this emerges naturally or whether this is something that has to be designed in. I honestly don't know. I'm agnostic about that. But this is the idea that these are systems that have the ability to model model themselves, and model not just themselves as an agent, but model their own mind. In other words, recursively model their own modeling. So have mental representations of their mental representations of their mental representations recursively. And of course, this is sort of a hallmark of sapience, perhaps more than sentience. Depends on how you define sapient and sentient and savant, and there are a few other terms like this. If you want to say that all mammals are sentient, they're conscious and they have some sort of obvious subjective experiences and respond very rapidly to stimuli, for example, and these sorts of things like animals do. If you want to call that sentience, and I'm perfectly happy for people to insist on that, that's fine. Dogs and cats are if you want to say they're conscious and they're self-aware and they're sentient, okay, that's great. But sapience, if you want to use that different term, that in my mind is different. This is where you can think about and articulate and model, and perform symbolic and abstract reasoning on your state of mind, on your mind and the contents of your thinking itself. And you can say, I think this about my thoughts, or I feel this way about my feelings, or I think of this about how I used to think about how I once felt about how I thought, and so on and so on. And there's really no end to that recursion. And once you have the capacity to have self-awareness with this recursive modeling that to my mind, seems quite unique to human beings and seems a core element of sapience. Well, that strikes me as something quite different, a type of intelligence, a qualitatively different type of intelligence that's doing a different type of functioning. And my impression is that when the folks like Marvin Minsky and Ray Kurzweil and Werner Vinge and these other people who are thinking about Goodman and others, when they were thinking about an intelligence explosion and a singularity and that sort of thing, my suspicion is that they were presuming that sort of recursive self-awareness, that was an integral component of an intelligence explosion. And my understanding there, I'll just very quickly, I'll stop talking in just a second, but just to complete this thought, my understanding is that it is a logical conclusion of this idea of just sort of an instrumental, I think it's the instrumental convergence hypothesis. Is that what Nick Bostrom calls it? Mm-hmm. At any rate, this is the idea that it is logical to for any agent to have some shared common set of instrumental goals, because logically serving those instrumental goals is a means of achieving effectively all other conceivable goals. And so you have to like you can't achieve any goals if you're dead. So survival is an instrumental goal. That's just logical. If you want to achieve any goal at all, you have to be alive in order to achieve it. So survival needs to be a subservient or a supervening, I guess, instrumental goal. Same with resources. Like if you want to be able to achieve any goal at all, you need to have some resources. If you have zero resources, you're not going to be able to achieve any other goal, and so you need to have resources. And then intelligence itself. Intelligence itself seems like you could think of it as a kind of resource, but if you want to think of it as something separate, well, then that's instrumental. And I think the idea was that any sapient, self-aware, recursively self-modeling intelligence would very quickly converge upon those instrumental goals as the means of achieving any other conceivable goals, including goals it hadn't thought of yet, goals that it would arrive at or would conceive of or would eventually just come to value. And so you would have an intelligence explosion as a function of pursuing those instrumental goals, like trying to acquire resources, trying to become smarter, and trying to stay alive. And there may be some other ones that I'm forgetting. But at any rate, those things don't necessarily seem to me to be obvious outcomes of the non-sapient general intelligence. Like I can see artificial general intelligence systems being generally intelligent in the second category that I mentioned without having any goals at all. I can certainly see that. But I do see, I think, paths for the emergence of instrumental goals and then other goals evolving very quickly, possibly, in any system that is sapient. And so that's very long-winded, but sorry, I've spent many years thinking about this, and those are the three categories that I still sort intelligence into in my own mind. And I have to say it's been so long since I was formal about the literature that I can no longer remember who or where to give credit. So none of this is my thinking originally at all, and that's certainly not. But I'm afraid I can't remember anymore how to properly attribute and cite the where these ideas come from. But that broad three category, those three buckets, that's how I've been thinking about things for a very long time, and I still think about them. Open to changing my mind, of course, but that's how I still think about them as of right now.
Yeah, thanks. That was useful. I guess I'll make a few remarks on that. Maybe there's a whole other conversation we can have in this direction. We could have it now, or we could sort of pivot back to the other topic at some point. But let's keep going with this for a little bit. So there is an argument, and I'm not sure to what degree I think it's a strong argument yet, but I'm actively thinking about it. There is an argument that any sufficiently capable general AI will become agentic, that it will acquire the characteristics of an agent, and maybe sentience is another layer beyond that. I don't know to what degree that is sort of one of these universal properties that you might expect to emerge at sufficient levels of capability. That seems to be a very important open question. I'm not sure I agree completely that the recursive self-modeling is as crucial as you were describing it to be. I'm unsure about that. But the agent-like behavior seems to be close to being something that you might expect to emerge. And the other comment I wanted to make is that, as you certainly know, Adam, one of the key arguments for AIs of sufficient power being by default dangerous, as in not only dangerous if somebody builds them to be dangerous, but actually by default a risk, is this instrumental convergence argument. It's that because any goal you give a sufficiently powerful AI, no matter how banal, one of the key steps to achieving any goal with sufficient certainty or at sufficient scale is to acquire all sorts of other intermediate goals. And the instrumental convergence hypothesis is that among those intermediate goals or instrumental goals are things like acquire power, become more intelligent, recursively self-improve, acquire and protect access to resources, and so a sort of under-controlled or unaligned AI might, by pursuing a rather banal goal, or even one that we view as ultimately good, may pursue instrumental goals that we view as highly non-aligned with human preferences, which is the polite way of saying we don't want to be paperclips. But between
there are a couple of things. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I have a couple of things to add. Just add
please.
In there, but go ahead. Please do finish if I didn't mean to interrupt you in the middle of a thought, but I do have a couple of things to add.
Yeah, you've often you've often distinguished when we've been talking about this between general AI and superintelligence. Um, what do
That's
you?
right. That was one of the things I was going to mention.
Hmm. So, what is the distinction there?
So I think that and others disagree. Well, I should say there's healthy debate about this, and there doesn't appear to me to be a broad consensus yet, in the at least in the conversations that I've participated in or observed, about whether or not artificial general intelligence uh, is inherently qualifies as super intelligence from T0, from the moment from the moment you admit generality. Do you also have super intelligence? And there's debate about that. I'm
Let's define
I guess,
superintelligence first. So by this you
yeah,
mean
that's where
smarter
the
than the
crux is.
smartest
What is
human?
super? Yeah, that's the crux. But the thing is, there's so that's the minimum, right? The minimum to qualify as super intelligent is smarter than the smartest human. Um, but uh, I don't think that equals. I don't think that's identical to the minimum amount of intelligence that poses a threat to humanity, or an existential threat, or an uncontrollable threat to humanity, or to to what's a better way to say it, that I think that there is potentially a gap between something that is minimally super intelligent, with respect to any individual human, something that is minimally super intelligent. Like, in other words, what is the minimum threshold to qualify as super intelligent with respect to any other human system? So I think you need to think about collective intelligence, organizations of people being able to achieve things that no individual person can. So that's in other words, I'm marking out sort of milestones or thresholds of up the ladder of super intelligence. The bottom rung would be smarter than the smartest individual person. Um, but there are a lot of rungs on that ladder. And some of the next ones up would be smarter than any non-computer assisted, non-software based collective intelligence that humanity is put together. So, for example, a group of people, and there are a lot of different ways you could think about anything from a married couple to a team to a giant corporation to a university, whatever. Those are all you can all think of those as systems that have intelligence, and they're certainly superhuman with respect to any individual person. But I don't think that those necessarily. I mean, I suppose there are certainly some organizations that we've already created that are super intelligent in a collective sense. And you have swarm intelligence and crowd intelligence too, which can be superhuman. It's hard to know exactly. That seems pretty narrow, like on narrow dimensions of intelligence, perhaps. But most of those don't represent sort of an existential threat that we have to worry about the alignment of in some sort of profound way. I mean, yes, there are ways in which large organizations that can outthink any individual person are threatening, and they do. They are. Humanity is threatened by armies and corporations and governments and all kinds of organizations all the time. But we don't worry about those the way that we worry about, the proverbial Terminator scenario, right? The Skynet. Why not? Well, I think that you then have to get some distance further up the superintelligence ladder before you have a system whose intelligence is overwhelmingly superior. And I don't know where or how to define that. I don't know at what point that occurs. And then this becomes a debate, an open question of, okay, well, what, if any, gap is there between these, artificial and general intelligence, so AGI, in those other categories that I mentioned, either the non-sapient version or the sapient version. At what point do those systems possess sufficient superintelligence to represent such a threat, such that we have a major alignment problem we have to think about very seriously? And my own personal opinion is that that gap could be surprisingly small. That an artificially generally intelligent system could become dangerously super intelligent surprisingly quickly. A lot of people don't think that. A lot of people think, at least in the conversations I've been part of and observed, a lot of folks think, well, yeah, you could be, if it's not sapient and it's not really pursuing those instrumental goals, and it's not really being agentic, it's going to be a long time before it's a threat, and we don't have to worry about turning into paperclips. And then there are other folks who think, yeah, well, I mean, it could go from being pretty smart to terrifyingly smart in an awful big hurry. And I've seen some compelling arguments for how and why. And then as far as the sapient version goes, I think one could make a case that an intelligence like that can become dangerous extremely rapidly. In my mind, like not years, but maybe not even months, but on the order of weeks or days or hours or something like that. So, but yeah, is that all? Yeah, there's a lot there. There's ways. There's the dimension of artificial intelligence, and then there's the dimension of super intelligence, and these are not perfectly aligned. I don't know if they're totally orthogonal to one another, but they're definitely different things. I don't think they're identical.
Right. Okay, so the main thing I want to do in this session is to talk about different kinds of timelines and different reactions to the perception of which timeline we're in. So at a high level, so maybe I'll just preface the discussion by describing, broadly speaking, how my own views have evolved. And I think many people have had this experience where we've gone from maybe a long time ago, even before the deep learning revolution, thinking that, artificial general intelligence or even sentient machines are possible, or at least we don't see any fundamental obstacles. Who knows how long it will take? We don't understand intelligence very well. We still don't understand our own intelligence very well. But apparently that's not a prerequisite for making progress on building artificial intelligence. So we've gone from a state of maybe thinking it's possible but being unclear about the timeline to after the deep learning revolution thinking that, well, a lot of people would have updated their timelines already in 2012, thinking that we seem to have gotten onto something, and that maybe brings it forward from 1,000 years from now to hundreds of years. And then as the progress has seemed basically easy, right, which is the really surprising thing. It's not easy like opening a jar of peanut butter is easy, but compared to many other areas of science, progress in deep learning has looked remarkably easy. And the ease of the progress, I think, has to update you on how difficult intelligence is to reproduce in general, right? And how difficult is intelligence a hard problem or a kind of easy problem, relatively speaking? And I think that is a judgment that has shifted for a lot of people over the last, since 2012. So it's only 10 years. Okay, so there's a range of views on the timelines. I think the people closest to it, not all of them have short timelines. There are surveys of machine learning researchers and AI researchers, and you will still find people who think that, maybe by the end of the century we'll have something that's a kind of human level intelligence or greater. But many people have shortened their timelines. Outside of the AI community, there are, maybe we could imagine, concentric circles of people who are more or less aware of what's going on, and the general public is seeing some of the progress, and some kinds of progress make more of an impact than others. I think the recent wave of progress on generating images has probably captured people's imagination more than much of what has come before. And that feeds back into people's expectations on what's going to happen and how close we are to creating something like an AGI. And I don't really want to focus necessarily in this session on our personal predictions, although that will come up naturally. What I'm interested in is the question of, I think there will be discontinuous jumps in the timeline estimates of various groups of people. And I think those jumps will have significant impacts on government policy, on economic behavior, on personal behavior, expectations for careers, and that's a circle of ideas I'd like to think through a bit more carefully. To that end, it's useful to know what we're talking about, so hence the definitions we just went through. But I'm a little... I mean, we don't want to fine-grain things too much, I guess, because it starts to become a bit unmanageable. I wonder if it's worth distinguishing expectations about different kinds of AI, or if we'll just stick with... I mean, what I proposed in the email was just to stick with timelines for AGI itself, where we pick that to mean something here. Maybe it could be disaggregated into 2 categories. I'm not sure. Do you have an opinion, Adam, on how much we want to disaggregate? I mean, you could imagine maybe the 2 big categories are, so if you ask someone, when do you think there will be a machine that could do... Well, okay, again, I'm not sure we want to focus purely on the Homo economicus, on the person as a tool in a machine. But if we're viewing things from an economic perspective, then I suppose an important question is, at what point can an artificial system do any job a human can do sitting in front of a computer? And let's say like a median human, not to be offensive about it, but that's going to come somewhat before the possibility of a machine that can reproduce the cognitive labor of any human. And it will be extremely disruptive, even if that prospect of replacing even the smartest humans is somewhat further along. And then, then there's the scenario where it's smarter than all humans put together by many orders of magnitude. So there's that kind of replacing of jobs question. And then there's the question of sentience, or, I don't have much to say about that, I guess. I thought to focus on the prospect of when people think that AIs can, say, replace any research mathematician or replace any lawyer, as a kind of organizing question for this. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to... I think I would add one possible thing to think about there. So I agree. If our overarching concern for purposes of this discussion is the when does the tide of public opinion and awareness turn, causing some major shift in public consciousness, the general zeitgeist, and sort of social consequences attendant upon that awareness. That's sort of, I think sort of an overarching thing that we're interested in trying to get a handle on here. And I think that that framing that in terms of what concerns could lead to sudden surge in awareness among the public and policymakers and anybody else. Certainly one concern is when certain types of jobs are threatened, when some perhaps proportion of jobs are threatened, there's just I think that's definitely a key signal. And perhaps another one would be like a key question you could ask is, what about the moment when a a machine, AGI or whatever it is, um, can do any job better than the best person. That doesn't necessarily mean you can replace all jobs immediately, right? I mean, just because you can read an X-ray better than the best human radiologist doesn't mean you suddenly put 500,000 radiologists out of work. Now, maybe it does if it's just a matter of software, but maybe there are occupations where that's not possible, where you would literally need 500,000 instances of that AGI running, and there aren't the resources, and there won't be the resources to do that for a while. Um, but you could, you do have some system that is, that can perform superhumanly, and it could replace the single best person at a given task or job or occupation. So I think those are probably slightly separate. Like when do all the jobs really start being threatened and quickly, versus like when can the machine do a better job than the best person? I think we're already there for quite a few positions, quite a few things now. Like if you another one to think about maybe is when can a machine or an AGI, I don't know however we want to say it, but when can the machine outperform not just humans, but humans plus machines, right? So when can the best machine outperform? When does the best machine performance occur when humans are out of the way, as opposed to with human guidance? So I'll give you an example of this. My understanding right now is that the very, very, very most powerful chess players right now are human software pairs, where you get a really, really good human chess player.
I don't think that's true.
Paired with starfish or something, or whatever it is, starfish. What is it? Is it whatever that thing is?
Stockfish.
And that you then stockfish. That's what it is. And that combination, like the human enhanced by the tool, is more powerful than any other combination. And my impression is that is going to be a very short-lived combo.
Yeah, no, it already passed. Yeah, there was some brief window, much celebrated by meat bags when that was true.
Okay, good. Well, I was not aware that was the case, but that was 100% what I was predicting, which was that will be very short-lived. Because we're desperately clinging to that idea right now. If you guys, I mean, you must be aware of this, right? Yeah. That you see. I mean, every time you open the news and see this, especially about art and so forth, there's a lot of talk about, well, the best combination is going to be a person and the machine working together, and no.
Yeah,
maybe right now.
The central cope of our age.
Right.
Yeah. All right. I think that's useful. I mean,
so those are a couple things. Like when are all the jobs going to disappear? When can a machine do better than the best person can possibly do in any given job, or across a range of jobs? And I think then we need to start talking about specific jobs, like what kind of what kind of work are we talking about? And are we gonna? Oh, I don't know. This is a big can of worms to open, but especially things like governance decisions. Like when should we turn economic policy and foreign policy over to AGI? I mean, if AGI can already do better than the best brain surgeon and the best mathematician, if we get to that point, then why would we hold out, governance and policymaking and stuff in foolish human hands? Why wouldn't we allow machines to make better decisions than us in that domain as well? And of course, that, like I said, this is a huge can of worms. But so I think there's something to be to that idea as well, as which jobs are we talking about?
Yeah, my response to that, somewhat cynically, would be that we have a very large infrastructure which projects the illusion that there's actual governance going on already, where in the core there's actually zero cognitive activity. Surely we can just repurpose that edifice to pretend that humans are still making the decisions when that core is replaced by something else. That's an area of entrepreneurship for an entire class of people to reinvent their jobs and maybe not even change them very much. I guess the gap between, maybe it's worth I don't know how seriously to take this, but it could be the case. I mean, suppose in some number of years there's an AGI that can perform the cognitive labor of a median human sitting at a keyboard in front of a computer, but that's a system that takes 1,000 GPUs. Maybe, of course, we should keep in mind that it takes a lot more hardware to train a model than to just run it. So let's suppose it means 1,000 GPUs for inference, that is, to actually run the system when it's trained. It may not be so easy to scale it up to effectively replace N humans, at least not immediately. I don't see that as much of an obstacle, really, so I'm not inclined to really pay much attention to this gap here. I think there are all sorts of microstructure that we can pay attention to as a second order analysis, but to first order, I think the way I'd like to think about it is there's a date at which this system gets built that can do the cognitive labor any median human can do. And then somewhat later, there's a time where it can replace the smartest human. But let's just focus on what I wrote as AGI median, AGI med, because the other thing will come soon enough. And AGI N med or AGI N max will also come soon enough after that. And I don't really want to pay attention to the distinctions between these. So for the purposes of today, I propose to just declare AGI to mean this one.
Okay, I'm willing to accept that for the purposes of this discussion. Let me note this one. Let me note one objection, Your Honor, just to let the record show. I personally think it's probably a mistake to be imagining that we will have systems that slowly crawl upward from subhuman to human level, median human level, to then superior, top human performance. And right now, I mean, you can pick anything, any intellectual domain, any function behind anything, a job a person does sitting behind a computer. For example, you mentioned take a job where someone's doing it behind a computer. The artificial intelligence trying to do that job is already superhuman in many ways, many ways. And it's at this point, it's just there are huge blind spots that result in very stupid or silly mistakes being made. And those are getting eliminated by various processes that you guys understand better than I do. But at the point at which the system is intelligent enough that it's not really making any mistakes, and it's not really getting doing anything really oddball, and doesn't have any huge blind spots, the moment where it stops being just getting tripped up on stupid stuff, it's so vastly superhuman in almost every other respect that it's not a human level at that point. It's massively superhuman. So I don't really, anyway. So I'm just lodging this official note in the record. Let the record show. I don't really see how human level is achievable at all. You sort of have blindly, weirdly, strangely dysfunctional, and then you close those gaps to super intelligence, and there's no human level in between. Mm-hmm. I mean, because computers can be able to do everything. Anyway, okay, you get it. So I'll just just making that point. So but for the purposes of the conversation, yes, I'm more than willing to accept the premise.
Yeah, I agree with that, which is partly why these categories don't seem that distinct to me. Okay, so given that, so this thing AGI is a distribution over dates, right? So we're sitting here, we have some Bayesian level of expectation about when this day will be, and I'd like to maybe, just for the sake of simplicity, give 3 scenarios, and then we can talk about what will happen to move people between these different kinds of scenarios, or believing rather in these different kinds of scenarios. Of course, it'll be much more continuous than what I'm about to describe, but Adam, can you step over here so the orb cam sees these boards, please? Yep, that's good. All right, so I'm going to call them A, B, and C. And so A is going to be short timelines. And by that I mean something like, so here's 2020, here's 2030, and a short timeline means something that is sort of peaking around 2030. So if you believe in a short timeline, you think, roughly speaking, there's a probability of at least 50% that we'll have AGI before 2030. Then a medium timeline I'll define to be something that views it as going to occur sometime in the next decade. But still with significant probability mass past there, and maybe it's not even Gaussian. Maybe if it's medium, you think, maybe there's some significant probability it happens before 2040, but maybe it sort of decays, something like that. And then C, of course, there's still people who think it's just impossible, etc., and we're not even going to talk about that. And so for a long timeline, I'm going to take it to mean that you think it's probably going to happen this century, but beyond that, you don't want to commit. So, I mean, who knows? Okay.
Now, presumably, if you were to, for example, survey people, and you were to ask them a question like, when do you think there's a 50-50 chance, or when do you think there's a 99% chance that AGI will have arrived, you would get a population level distribution like this as well, of sort of public opinion. It's different than exactly these scenarios, but they would, you would, over time, you would see public opinion shifting, presumably, and it would, at different points in time, it would probably reflect these different scenarios at the population, sort of the aggregate sentiment level. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So these are probability distributions. So if I were to ask Adam, or I was to say myself what my beliefs are about when AGI will arrive, well then, in principle, one of these graphs describes my subjective belief about that question. Then as we go across the population, each individual has some graph like this, and then you can say that each time they receive some information, they'll update and shift their subjective estimates from one of these graphs to another, or to, of course, something in between. So yeah, we imagine, for example, learning about GPT might shift you from medium to short, something like that. Okay, so in addition to these three scenarios, I wanted to identify a few groups of people and then talk about when we might think that those groups of people will shift from viewing one scenario as most likely to another, and what that might mean. So I haven't thought too much about these groups, so feel free to disagree if maybe a different classification makes more sense. But the three I thought of were the sort of insiders, by which I mean people in tech companies, researchers, engineers, the sort of experts, the domain experts in this technology, which would also include investors. So the insiders, let's call them. And then, I mean, definitely not insiders technically, but people whose opinion matters very much are elites. So by that I would mean kind of cultural elites, also political elites, economic elites outside of the investors. I guess by investors here I mean people that are actually investing in the technology, so VCs, for example. And the third, I just mean everyone else. Any comments on that classification, Adam?
I think that's broadly how I would break it down. I honestly don't know who might have a claim to better understanding, the best understanding. I mean, in my experience looking at other technology disruptions, the insiders can often be quite myopic as a result of primarily as a result of the different incentives that weigh on them. It's not that they're, it's not even that they lack exposure to information. It's that they resist certain onboarding certain information. And so we see, like if somebody, just one specific example is that if somebody's really, really, committed to fuel cell vehicles or, a technology that is a dead end, they will, really, they won't know or understand necessarily the mega trends that are going on, as well as, for example, a non-technical person who's in a venture capital group that's looking at a more macro level. But having said that, I don't know where the best knowledge and understanding lies. That's my big question with this. This is how I would break it down, except that I would look at the sort of that top category and say, gosh, where is the best knowledge? And I don't have a great answer to that. It's varied over time. Like right now, the best general track record of success for anticipating disruptive technological change lies with expert groups like the organization I work for. But that hasn't always been the case, and it's certainly possible that it's not the case for this particular technology, for artificial intelligence. In fact, I kind of suspect it isn't. So Tony Seba, for example, has been a remarkably successful technology disruption analyst, and he's got a great framework for that. But I personally suspect that AI breaks our theoretical framework in some fundamental ways. And so my big question here is yes, you've got sort of the insiders and the technical domain experts. You've got elites in leadership and decision-making roles, and then you've got everybody else. But where is the best knowledge and expertise? That I don't know. That's a question in my mind.
Yeah, I guess on the point about incentives, so it's often the case that when a technology has negative consequences or unintended uses that might suggest regulation is a good idea, insiders have a rather strong incentive to talk down the rate of progress, which you can see very clearly with AI, where I'm not saying it's conscious necessarily, right? But a lot of the insiders will not really want to talk about things like AGI or AI safety. In part, in part it's just the pragmatism, right? I mean, they're engineers at heart, so they want to build things and talk about things that exist and not pontificate too much on the future because that's kind of their temperament. But that aligns very well with their incentives to not have other people freak out about it, right? So they will say things like, well, we'll have plenty of time to figure out what the consequences are once we get a bit further along, and things like that, which sound kind of pragmatic, but really, from the point of view of the people who are likely to be impacted, seem a bit hollow and self-serving, I think, often.
Yeah, I agree with that. Certainly, I think that makes very good sense. It also makes me, it reminds me that there are a lot of different different dimensions of expertise that one would need to consider being brought to bear on the issue as a whole. So, as an analogy, historically, one can think of the example of nuclear weapons, the development of nuclear weapons, and the technical experts and the engineers and the leaders, the leadership that was involved in the development of that technology. Those may not have been the people with the most expertise for understanding the social, economic, political, all of those other dynamics, right? So that would be a separate set of expertise and other domains of expertise. So there's a difference between the expertise required to develop a technology and the expertise required to anticipate and its impacts in different ways and in all the different domains and possibly many different sets of expertise. And then perhaps another set of expertise for how best to achieve control over a technology through regulation or a combination of regulation and markets and whatever else. If you have decided on a specific goal or an end, like how do you achieve an aim with regulatory apparatus? That's another set of expertise.
Okay. Maybe let's just go through a few of these combinations, and that'll be a good stimulus for conversation. So the first one I had written down here was, so I'm not sure the best notation for this, but so let's use the letters. So T, E, P. Okay, so the tech leaders, the insiders. Oh, I guess I used I for insiders. Let's do that. Okay, insiders go from long to medium to short. And I would say this is kind of most insiders, most people in tech would have thought AGI was some kind of stupid fascination of mathematicians and people in academia before 2010, roughly. Of course, there were people like Kurzweil who were long-term believers and actually building their careers out of a belief in in this kind of thing, and they deserve a lot of credit for being right. But I think that's kind of accurate. I don't know when. Of course, you can survey people. I'm not sure I really. Yeah, maybe this is a clear indication of bias. I've seen surveys in various books about AI and in articles where they survey AI researchers and get their expectations on timelines. Maybe for next time I can take a look at those and communicate what those surveys say. I think there's a very strong incentive to not seem crazy. So just talking to people, I get the impression that the kind of answer they would give to that survey is much more conservative than what they would say to you in private. So in private, people are often much more willing to choose shorter timelines. And then for the estimates they would give in a talk or when they're speaking to the public, they would feel the need to be able to defend them very thoroughly, which would mean being able to cite existing research or existing lines of investigation with a little bit of extrapolation. That's not bad. That instinct is a kind of scientific instinct, but forecasting is not well served perhaps by that instinct. So I do
Yeah,
think that
this is something we see in many domains. 100% correct, Dan. We see it in lots of different domains. Many of the ones my team looks in, and then in other domains like the climate change community, where the consensus is conservative for exactly the reasons you mentioned. And it does. There is a derivative there. It tends to march in one direction over
right.
time, and yeah. So it's so you can kind of we have a catchphrase, a little like a hashtag internally in my team called "Watch the Delta," which is watch for the rate of change at which the forecasting time horizons move forward.
Right.
And it's the dynamics in the private consulting, the McKinseys of the world, all the Bloombergs and all that sort of stuff. Same pattern in the climate science community, same pattern in the energy sector, same pattern in the automotive sector, same pattern. Exactly what you just described for the reasons you just described. So you're 100% on the money, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, so regarding the insiders, I mean, just my personal opinion, just watching the way people talk and the way they allocate their attention, which is, of course, the better thing to watch, the action rather than the speech. I think a lot of people probably shifted their expectations from the long to the medium around 2017. So, or sort of shortly thereafter, let's maybe say 2018. Largely as a result of transformers. So transformers are a class of neural networks that was invented in 2017 in natural language and then spread across every other domain and is now unquestionably the dominant paradigm for deep learning. And it's the first time where really there was a single architecture that just without really modification could handle almost any modality. So it's a very general differentiable computer, basically. And people's ambition with deep learning really underwent a step change when this was discovered. And there's been a gold rush ever since, really. And then I think somewhere around 2020, and I'm going to sort of blame this on GPT-3, I think a lot of people shifted their timelines very aggressively forward to expecting somewhere around the end of the decade. I mean, maybe it varies. Maybe it's 2030. Just to cite some examples from people that the audience may know. So, John Carmack, who is not like a central hit figure in the history of deep learning, but a famous game developer, is now full-time doing AI research, and he's rich enough to just buy a giant NVIDIA kind of supercomputer to put in his basement. And his personal estimate is 50% by 2030. And that's a phrase you often hear, actually, is people, their point estimate is 2030. Now, one shouldn't take these kinds of things too seriously, right? It's not like he knows how to do it. But, he's a serious guy thinking from first principles and comes up with this number. And yeah, there's sort of various lines of attack you might take to come up with a similar figure. So he's not an outlier when it comes to a certain community of people. And in that community, you would also put, I think, the tech leads at places like OpenAI. I don't know that people at Google or DeepMind are sort of on the record as giving their estimates, but I think that Shane Legg some time ago gave around 2030 as an estimate. So it's certainly not a universal opinion within the tech elite. So maybe this is still underway, right? This transition. But I think within a few years, this will be a dominant opinion, and it's certainly shaping the behavior of VCs and the inner core of large tech companies. You can see the way they're allocating resources is they're believers.
One
Okay.
thing, can I add one thing here,
Yeah.
Dan? Which is that one of the things that we've seen historically with technology disruptions of other kinds is that the telescoping forward of the projections for when a technology will mature and maturation is it's a tough thing to describe. But sorry, what I'm trying to say is that historically in instances where these timelines have been telescoping forward, if the technology was indeed imminent, then that delta that I mentioned, the shortening of the horizon of people's expectations, that has tended to move only in one direction. In instances where there was disagreement and the technology in reality was further from maturity than we thought, then the time horizons, they can telescope forward and then bounce back out. They can, we realize there's some hurdle, and then people start estimating further out again. Now there's not much you can proactively deduce from this ahead of time, because you just can't know. Like, you can't know whether you're really close to the technology maturation or not. There's just no way to know. But here's one thing that you can say about that, which is, if we are genuinely close to it, one thing to expect is that these expectations, they will continue to come closer and closer and closer right up until the moment of arrival. And so if we are indeed close, then don't be surprised that in 2025 or 2026, we are predicting 2028 and 2029 for this thing to arrive. Does that make sense? And if it isn't actually close, then what I would suspect is that by 2025, 2026, people will be changing their minds a little bit, and we'll say, well, maybe it's 2035 or 2040 after all. If another couple of years go by and the timelines are only continuing to march forward, I would take that as a sign. Now, again, you can't deduce too much from that, but it doesn't hold that much water. But based on what we've seen in previous technology disruptions, it's a pattern to watch for.
Yeah, maybe let's give a bit of a contrarian take, since we've been kind of boosters for much of this conversation. Yeah. So famously, Elon Musk has been saying he's going to have self-driving cars in 5 years for, I don't know, certainly
5 years at least.
I mean, I remember, I think when I first came back to Australia, so that was 2015, I think Musk was predicting self-driving cars, within a few years. I think that was probably right. And that keeps getting pushed back, and I don't know what your estimates are, Adam, but it's revealed continually to be a much harder problem than it seems. So there's at least one tech leader whose predictions about a particular subset of AGI are not to be taken at face value.
Yeah, and that also fits the pattern that I described earlier as well, which is that if the technology were genuinely imminent, then most observers making predictions would be correcting in the direction of sooner than we thought. And since we're not seeing that, that is a sign that the technology is not imminent, right? If the technology were imminent, the self-driving, then what we would expect would be the opposite of what has happened with Elon Musk, right? People would be saying it's 10 years away, and then the next year 1 year later they'd be saying it's 8 years away, and 2 years later they would be saying it was 5 years away, and there would be this marching forward, this outpacing of the telescoping of the projected finish line relative to the actual movement forward in time, right? The finish line would be approaching us faster than time is progressing, faster than 1 year per year, in other words. The opposite's happening with Elon Musk. That's a very bad sign for self-driving technology, but he's also just one voice, and more reasonable voices haven't been making such crazy forecasts. So
yeah, on that note, since we're discussing Tesla, it's interesting to look at their recent announcements, and what it occurs to me that maybe Musk knows that the stock price of Tesla is kind of an AGI bet, something like that. right? Where they're investing in a wide range of technologies that you'd expect to be incredibly valuable if AGI is cracked, like just general robotics, and the self-driving car is a subset of
Yeah, for sure.
general
Yeah.
robotics, and the robot they've announced and so on is you kind of you could say he's just doubling down on the he can't retreat from these predictions, so he's just like a magician who keeps pulling a new fancy thing out of the hat. I think that's the interesting thing about Musk is I think that's also true, but it's in some sense if you have the wind at your back, then the crazy bet isn't actually irrational or foolish. It's kind of just you know the wind is going to arrive in your sails at some point, and you just have to keep you know keep dancing around and keep the game going until you happen to catch the wind. And I think the wind will come, and I wouldn't be short on Tesla, but yeah, I don't know what your take on the stock price of Tesla is. Is it really about a car company, or is it actually it's a kind of story stock around the AI trajectory? It seems to me.
Yeah, it's hard to to pin that the behavior of the company down. I mean, they've got a lot of different things going on, and they've got obviously quite a very eccentric leadership, and they're unusual for a company as large and successful as they are to have a leader with so much influence, an individual person with so much influence over the destiny of the company. That's rare too, right? I mean, Elon Musk is not just the CEO; he's also like the largest shareholder, and he wields a huge amount of influence over the decisions. You know, so it's a strange situation. Um, there, the in my mind, I agree that it's a sensible bet, right? I mean, whether for luck or whether by virtue of luck or hard work or all of the above, Tesla has managed to be successful in building an electric car company, and they make electric cars that people really want. And as a result of that, they're on track to become just an absolutely staggeringly, they already are a staggeringly profitable enterprise, right? By any conceivable measure right now, finally. I mean, they weren't. There was just a few years ago they were on the ropes. But now, I mean, they're selling, what I think they're going to sell 1 million cars in the year. They're going to make 10 or 20 billion dollars in profit. They have no debt to speak of. I mean, like the traditional car companies are like 4 or 5 to 1 debt to annual revenues ratios. Toyota's like Toyota's $200 billion in debt, right? Which is way a big multiple of their annual revenues, as far as I understand it. I don't know the exact numbers, but Tesla doesn't have any debt, so they've just got all this cash. It would be crazy not to lay down some multi-billion-dollar bets on these new technologies if there's any chance of owning even a piece of the robot market of the future, or the self-driving market of the future. Yeah, and I think it's the same reason why Google had the moonshot sort of programs as well. If they've got all that, they're flush with all that cash, it's worth making a pretty big bet, even if the chances of it succeeding are small. As for the actual likelihood of success or leading, I don't know. I'm not able to evaluate Tesla's AI expertise the way you guys are. I don't know whether they've got a deep team or if it's all for show. I don't know whether their efforts are whether their internal efforts are really going to be the winning horse, or whether they'll just buy buy the smaller companies and accumulate the technology that way, as they did with batteries. I don't know, but if I had $4 or $5 billion of cash coming in every quarter, I would make big bets on self-driving technology and robotics, other robotics areas as well, for sure. I mean, I think that's just a very logical decision. And quite frankly, I'm surprised that others are not doing more of this. That's the surprising thing. Like if you are a tech company with billions of dollars, what are you using that money for if you're not investing in positioning for a the AI AGI revolution that's coming, as it were. Yeah, yeah. It just seems like the smart money has got to be trying to find a way to get some piece of whatever this is that's imminent now, or that feels imminent anyway.
Yeah, that's an actually an interesting point to dwell on for a minute. So I would say the main reason I would say why I think this I category of people have adopted shorter timelines is just follow the money. The level of investment in so all the I think essentially all the co-authors on the Transformer paper from 2017 now run their own startups funded to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars collectively. The level of investment, I mean, of course, it could just be crazy, right? The VCs may just have no clue, but it's real money. It's not like it's a joke, right? And if people are putting money on the line, they mean it to the degree that you can mean something. So I think the level of investment, not only in AI capabilities, but the increasing level of investment in AI safety in particular, is an indication that a lot of these insiders are taking the short timelines very seriously, right? I mean, VCs typically aren't investing on timelines of 100 years. That isn't their business model. Not even really on timelines of 20 or 30 years, most of them. Most of them are looking to get returns in some window that is only consistent. I mean, if you just add up the amount of investment and think about, well, how much economic growth would be necessary to really justify that, I think it's difficult to square with even medium timelines for. I mean, of course, you can get a lot of economic value out of just narrow AI, which is, of course, what most of this investment is in. But I think it's an indicator anyway. Okay, shall we move on to another one of the categories?
Well, let me add one just very quickly, Dan. One thing there, I think that is it's a question in my mind, which is there is the around this investment, this question of all, okay, there's a huge amount of investment going into this space now, and that indicates something. Expectations, some amount of insider knowledge, okay, all the rest of it. But if the prize is really as great as as is expected, right? I mean, if this is really like if winning this race means you win the world, the real question in my mind is why is there not more investment? And in particular, why are states not invested in this? Why are there not sort of $50-100 billion per year, defense budgets, pouring money into this? I mean, if you win this race, you just absolutely win everything. So it would seem like the stakes are sort of just they're infinitely high, and it would justify, if not not an infinitely large, but it would justify an extremely large amount of expenditure, not just among sort of private investors, but by states. And so this would then lead me to ask, well, why aren't they if they aren't making these expenditures? And second question would be, are they making these expenditures and we just don't know about it? They're stealth, as it were. So I just add that in there.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue into this elites category. I think the chip war and the recent regulation on exporting advanced semiconductors to China strikes me as a leading indicator of at least one state, the US, making this transition among its elites from L to M. So yeah, I agree. Actually, it's a big mystery to me why there isn't orders of magnitude more concern, but also investment among militaries and also just economic investment in these technologies. You could say there is, right? I mean, for example, the US just in the last couple of years has stepped up a lot of federal funding for research institutes in AI. There's, you could say that America has always had a strong industrial policy of subsidizing development in various areas of technology and kind of a so the US often criticizes China for this too tight integration between the government and businesses around scientific development and technology, and the subsidization of the champions in various sectors, and how this is anti-competitive and so on. And of course, to a large degree, they're just copying the way the Americans, for example, kickstarted Silicon Valley with money from the Pentagon and so on. But okay, so to some extent, it's really a significant increase in the level of industrial policy around semiconductors, around AI and affiliated technologies in the US just over the last couple of years. So I think it's not like nothing is happening. Clearly, you can see some hints of people starting to be convinced that this is of short-term importance. Now, the question is that really about narrow or general AI, right? I mean, you could say that, well, DARPA has been involved in funding AI for decades, right? There's a reason a lot of this development happened in the US, and it's, a lot of it happened in Canada, right? Like Canada was famously encouraging research in deep learning through funding for many years, when this was considered kind of a joke by the mainstream ML and AI communities. But America has certainly been funding this for a long time. So it wouldn't be accurate to say that the elites, politically, culturally, economically, haven't been paying attention to machine learning or kind of narrow AI. But I would say that these moves, it's really difficult to understate. It's difficult to overstate how important these recent moves with banning the export of semiconductors and manufacturing equipment to China are. This is a big deal. This is a clear escalation in the Cold War between the US and China, and it seems to be tied to some kind of dawning realization. At least this is how I interpret it. A dawning realization that AGI may be coming fairly soon. I don't know what your take on that is, Adam.
Yeah, and we've gone back and forth a little bit privately, Dan, you and I, outside of these discussions, and I've expressed exactly the same sentiment when I saw the news of this change in some of the strategically relevant policymaking around these technologies, especially between the United States and China. That was this. It's a little bit conspiratorial, I know, but it was one of the first things that came to my mind, which is our decision makers in the category of elites, as you have put it up above there. In other words, our decision makers in government leadership in the United States and elsewhere, starting to get serious about this technology race. And if the expectation had shifted from scenario L to M, or especially if it had shifted closer to the S scenario, then what action would we expect those elites to take? What could they take in light of a public that is not yet there with them? Right. So if the public were still with, broadly speaking, the L scenario, then what actions can policymakers take, and can government officials and bureaucracies writ large, what action could they take based on knowledge and based on the advice of and insight from the tech layer, the insiders layer? Well, I would imagine it would look an awful lot like what we're seeing. And so I think it aligns. Now, that doesn't mean it's true. But this is the nature of these sorts of wheelings and dealings and shenanigans, right? Is you need plausible deniability. If you're doing something for one reason and you can't sell that to the public, you need to have another good reason for doing it, for justifying it. And of course, that aligns pretty well too. But yeah, that was absolutely where my mind went. First of all, I don't think it's implausible in the slightest.
Maybe it's worth.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Well, it was just that. Just then leads to the other portion of the agenda that that you had laid out for us, which was this idea of, okay, so what happens if sentiment writ large begins to shift, right?
Mm.
So
Yeah, let's get on to that. There's one comment I wanted to make first, though, which is, well, why do. Let me just defend the case a bit that the recent moves by the US administration, why do they represent perhaps a shifting sentiment from long to medium timelines? That's because, okay, let me say to my understanding what they did. So, not only did they ban the sale from American companies to Chinese companies of equipment and semiconductors, uh, it's a bit fine grained, right? The restrictions are mostly on high end semiconductors, so it's not like the chips that go into your Toyota Camry are sort of banned from being exported. It's meant to be high end chips, so it's aimed directly at AI. For example, this is named in the regulation. Uh, why go after that? Okay, so what has been done? So export has been banned. Software that is used to lay out chips has been regulated. Also, American citizens in China who are working in these companies are not allowed under, you know, are not allowed to continue working on these kinds of technologies. But also third parties. So, for example, ASML in Europe can't continue to sell their technology into China for these high end chips without facing consequences. So, for example, they wouldn't be able to sell into America. Okay, so it's not like America's obviously the world hegemon, but they can't dictate to everybody what to do forever. So China's a large market. Over time, they will develop a domestic capability. You can be more or less skeptical about how well that will go, but over time, I think it can be done. And other companies around the world won't ignore this market. They will find ways to sell into it, or they'll take the hit, or they'll spin out subsidiaries that manage to get around the rules. So it's not like this is a permanent solution, right? You can't just cut the second biggest economy in the world off from the most important resource in the world indefinitely without a war. That's just not possible. So it's a short-term measure. So it's a delaying tactic, right? All this can achieve is to put China behind for some number of years, and then maybe they catch up or maybe they don't. But it's a short-term measure. If you think, I mean, if you don't imagine there's going to be a major war that has AI as a substantial input within 10 to 20 years, and you don't think this economically will make a huge difference within 10 to 20 years, it's a huge risk to take for no real benefit. I mean, there are clear downsides to this regulation, right? It will have costs for American businesses. And so it seems to me only rational to take this kind of move if you think that in the short term it matters. So I think it's only on the basis of a medium timeline that this strategically makes any sense. I don't know if you agree with that, Adam.
yep, I agree with that completely. I don't see a different plausible interpretation. Um, One could argue what the temptation is always with American politics is always to default to some sort of um, political expediency or grandstanding in service of whatever the short-term election goals are for different politicians, as opposed to the long-term goals of bureaucracy and you know longer-term policymaking. And so, but in this case, I don't really see evidence, don't see compelling evidence that that's the case. I don't see how this is a political football or a political wedge issue or anything politically expedient that could explain sort of grandstanding or rattling the saber or, pissing off China or any of these other sort of things that you might obtain short term, because that's what you mentioned, short term benefits from at the expense of long term stability and the benefits of a presumably a more cordial long-term trade relationship with China. And so it seems like a big potential downside to take for what is gained in the short term. And I think the superficial analysis I'm seeing as well, it's protectionist, it's trying to repatriate manufacturing back to the US, it's trying to ensure that we don't suffer supply chain shortages like we are or have done recently in the future. But that all seems like a bit of a, that seems pretty thin, seems like hogwash basically. It just doesn't seem like there's a deep enough rationale there, because given like you said, this, how much the potential there is to poison the well, to really sour the relationship between the United States and China. It seems like
not just China, but also with all the European.
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah, exactly. So
it also gives a huge impetus to the Chinese domestic semiconductor manufacturers. So I guess it's easy sitting in America to underestimate how difficult it is to build an industry from behind when it has economies of scale, right? This is just the most difficult development problem out, is if somebody's also already reached economies of scale, to build up an industry, you have to, well, the obvious answer is you kind of protect it by tariffs or something, right? So that you give an artificial advantage to your domestic competitor while they catch up. But that's really hard to do, because without exposing the company to competition, it just becomes typically inept, nepotistic, corrupt, just dependent on subsidies, and nobody actually does the hard work necessary to catch up with the international incumbent. And China's success, the part of it that is really, it's very far from straightforward to achieve what China did, not only with manufacturing, but also now with software, to not only put protections in place, but to stop your domestic companies from being stupid without the competition. You have a large enough domestic market, you can make it work, but semiconductors work at such a scale that even China's domestic market it's kind of doesn't have enough demand for the high-end chips to make this trivial. So it's, without really being forced into this corner, it could have been easy for the Chinese domestic semiconductor manufacturers to continue to not really be able to catch up. But this, by forcing the issue, it resolves a lot of internal political problems around trying to get this effort to proceed more quickly. So it's in some sense handing a gift to the domestic semiconductor capability, in terms of getting them focused on this competition. And that also, I mean, that's a major part of the risk from my point of view of taking the moves that the Americans have in the last 6 months.
Yeah, the only thing about all of this is that and this is the problem, of course, that of all conspiracy theorists theorizing rather and that sort of thing, is that you're giving too much credit to the sophistication and wisdom and cunning and guile of the people who are involved. And the reality, of course, is that the people and the organizations and the systems that they're part of are usually a lot dumber than that. And so the question then to ask is there a stupid explanation? Is there an explanation for taking all of these actions that doesn't require a great deal of foresight and wisdom and understanding this issue and playing 4D chess and all of that kind of thing? Is there some simpler, what's the simpler explanation for just doing this and being stupid about it and taking unnecessary risks and blah, blah, blah? I suppose you could make a case for that, but this one's awful suspicious, especially considering it's it's a far-reaching policy in terms of time and the huge stakes involved. There's hundreds of industries, the whole global economy is touched by this, because semiconductors and chips are now just ubiquitous. They're in everything. No part of the global economy is not going to be touched by this policymaking. So, the default assumption should be that people have thought through it pretty darn carefully. But having said that, let's leave a margin there of our uncertainty. Let's admit that there's a possibility that this is just the U.S. government full of idiots doing something really fucking dumb for some reason that it's not some grand conspiracy or great big plan, but it's just some dumb fuck thing that they're doing. And this has happened many times in the past. So let's hold out some possibility that that's the case too.
Witness, everyone, the faith an American has in their institutions.
Yeah.
In 2022.
I
think given
you don't get to be a citizen of a country that elects Donald Trump as your president, and then just automatically assume that your government is making genius 4D chess moves in the policy-making arena. So you have to be humble about it. It's a little bit and cynical.
Yeah. I think we should probably start next time with the question of public opinion and its timelines and what those shifts might mean, given the time we have left. So I suggest we use the last 10 minutes or so to have a bit of a break and open up the discussion for questions and play a little bit of Penrose tiles. So if you'll follow me, I have a bit of a surprise. Sure. Have you seen this before, Adam?
I haven't been in here before. This is new to me.
Okay. All right. So on the bottom of your screen, you have two. Well, you'll see personal boards still there, but you have darts and kites. Okay. So if you hit 1 for dart, then you can click on the little tabs on the side of this thing and finish this star. Yeah, there you go. Okay. Now, it can be extended infinitely, but there are many ways to do it. Infinitely many ways to tile the plane. These are called Penrose tiles, by the way. There's two shapes, darts and kites. There's infinitely many ways to tile the plane, but there are also, it's not that any given move always works. So this is a fun little thing to play with. You guys can take it from there, I think, see what you think works. And there's also at the top, you can click play to each tile has a sound inside it. So my suggestion is you can also undo. Are there any questions for Adam or myself from the previous session? Any things people are curious about?
I don't really have any questions, but very interesting to listen into.
Yeah, welcome. Adam, I don't know if I've introduced Rowan to you before. Rowan's a master's student of mine who just finished. He's basking in the glow of a recently completed thesis before he starts his PhD. It's like the best few months for a long time.
Yeah.
Enjoy it while it lasts.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah.
So he wrote an excellent thesis, and he's going on now to do some AI research with a group. I don't actually know physically where it is, but the money and organization is through CSIRO, which is a sort of national research institute in Australia. Where will you actually be, Rowan?
I actually don't know either. I mean, physically I'll be in Melbourne, but I can't narrow it down any more than that at this stage.
Right, okay.
I don't know which of their campuses it's at. I think I'll spend a bit of time at Unimelb as well, though, because one of my supervisors is there.
Right, yeah.
How do you control where the tile goes?
There's only one valid direction it can attach at any given site, so it chooses that one. You can choose where to attach it by clicking the little tabs, but that's the only control that you have. It's also, as you notice, very easy. Sometimes you'll click on it and it won't place. That's because it intersects with some existing tiles. Yeah, it's also quite easy to screw up. As Adam has noticed over here, yeah.
Yeah, I need a delete button.
Yeah, no delete currently. You got to get it right.